"Don't drink that wine." The words left Abigail Carter's mouth a fraction of a second before the silver tray crashed against the polished deck of the yacht. Crystal shattered. Red wine splashed across white linen. Every conversation died. The wine glass in Alessandro Moretti's hand stopped halfway to his lips. Abigail stood frozen in her black apron, breathing hard, staring not at the mafia boss, not at his fiancée, but at a white linen cloth stained with a faint blue-green ring no one else seemed to notice. Silence hit the room harder than the falling tray ever could. 3 hours earlier, Abigail had been doing what she always did best, disappearing. The staff entrance of the Moretti yacht smelled of polished brass, expensive flowers, and salt carried in from the Hudson. Men in tailored suits moved through the corridors with purpose. Women in evening gowns floated through the main deck like they belonged to another species entirely. Abigail moved around them carrying trays, checking seating cards, adjusting silverware, making herself invisible whenever guests looked her way. It was a skill she had spent most of her life perfecting. At 32 years old, she knew exactly how to shrink herself without physically becoming smaller. Growing up overweight taught a woman certain things. How to enter a room without drawing attention. How to laugh before other people laughed at you. How to apologize for taking up space. The black service apron tied around her waist felt less like a uniform and more like armor. "Careful with the glasses," a supervisor said as he passed. "These cost more than your car." He smiled when he said it. That made it worse. Abigail smiled back because that was what women like her did. They swallowed humiliation whole and called it professionalism. Beyond the service corridor, the engagement celebration was already beginning. Reporters, politicians, donors, judges, CEOs. Half the city's power seemed to be floating on the river tonight. At the center of it all stood Alessandro Moretti. 43. Broad-shouldered, dark suit, calm eyes that missed very little. Men lowered their voices when he entered a room. Women straightened unconsciously when he walked past. Abigail had worked enough Moretti events to recognize something else about him. He rarely repeated a question. He rarely raised his voice, and somehow that made him more intimidating than anyone who did. His fiancée, Victoria Sinclair, was standing beside him when Abigail first noticed the odd thing. Victoria was beautiful in the way magazines liked. Elegant, controlled, expensive. The future Mrs. Moretti. The woman every camera followed. Abigail was carrying champagne flutes toward the preparation station when she saw Victoria enter the private wine room. Alone. It lasted less than 30 seconds. Not suspicious enough to report. Not strange enough to remember. Except when Victoria emerged, she wasn't carrying the same bottle. Abigail almost dismissed it. Almost. Then she saw Victoria wipe the base of one wine glass with a folded linen cloth before handing it back to the sommelier. One small movement. 1 second. Nothing more. Abigail kept working, kept serving, kept disappearing, until she reached for that same linen cloth later and found herself staring at a pale blue-green ring dried into the fabric. Her stomach tightened instantly. A memory surfaced before she could stop it. Then, sirens. Her little brother's hospital tag. Her mother crying that she never noticed anything was wrong. Nobody listening until it was too late. Abigail folded the cloth and slipped it into the pocket of her apron. Then she looked up and realized Alessandro Moretti was raising that exact wine glass toward his mouth. The stem of the glass hovered inches from Alessandro Moretti's hand. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Abigail could hear the river striking the hull somewhere below the deck. A slow, rhythmic sound beneath the suffocating silence. Then Victoria Sinclair smiled. It was a beautiful smile. Controlled. Polished. The kind of smile that belonged on magazine covers and charity billboards. "Poor Abigail," she said softly, setting her own glass down. "She gets overwhelmed sometimes." A few guests laughed under their breath. Not openly, not cruelly. That almost made it worse. Abigail felt every eye slide toward her apron, her size, her shaking hands, toward the familiar conclusion everyone always reached when a woman like her interrupted people who mattered. "I'm not overwhelmed," she said. Her voice sounded smaller than she wanted. "Then what are you?" Victoria asked gently. "Concerned." Another ripple of polite laughter. Alessandro still hadn't taken a sip. That was the only thing keeping Abigail standing. Most men would have dismissed her already, ordered security, called her crazy. Instead he looked at her the way a judge looked at evidence. Cold, patient, measuring. "Why?" he asked. One word. Nothing more. The room quieted again. Abigail reached into her apron pocket and felt the folded linen cloth. Damp, slightly stiff where the stain had dried. "Because something's wrong." Victoria tilted her head. "With the wine?" "I think so." "You think?" Victoria's voice remained warm. "That's a serious accusation based on a thought." More nods. More agreement. Pressure pressed against Abigail from every direction. She suddenly became aware of how ridiculous she looked standing among senators, donors, judges, and television cameras. Just another overweight waitress making a scene. Alessandro extended his hand. "Show me." Abigail hesitated before placing the folded cloth in his palm. He unfolded it carefully. The faint blue-green ring remained visible beneath the crystal chandeliers. Several guests leaned forward. Victoria didn't. That was the first thing Alessandro seemed to notice. Most people would have looked immediately. Victoria kept her eyes on Abigail instead. "A stain," she said, "on a service towel. You wanted it thrown away?" Abigail replied before she could stop herself. Victoria's expression never changed. "Because it's a dirty towel." Alessandro looked from one woman to the other, then down at the cloth again. His thumb traced the edge of the discoloration. "Where did you get this?" "The wine room." "When?" "About 40 minutes ago." Victoria's smile tightened by a fraction. "Almost invisible." "Almost." Alessandro handed the cloth back. "That doesn't prove anything." The words hit hard because Abigail knew he was right. Around them, the party slowly began breathing again. Conversations restarted. Music returned. A server passed carrying hors d'oeuvres. Somewhere near the rear bar, a dishwasher door slammed shut and rattled metal shelves. Life resumed, but not completely. Alessandro still hadn't drunk the wine. Abigail noticed him glance once toward the main service station, toward the wine inventory log sitting beside the sommelier's desk. Just once, quietly, like he had filed something away. Victoria stepped closer to him. Her hand rested lightly on his sleeve. "We should continue," she said. "People are waiting." "Of course," he replied. Yet his eyes drifted briefly toward the wine room entrance. Abigail started to step back. The moment was over. She had said her piece. She would probably lose her job by midnight. Then her phone vibrated inside her apron pocket. One notification. One message from an unknown number. She frowned and looked down. The text contained only 6 words. "Check the security footage. Missing 8:17 p.m. The message sat on Abigail's screen like a splinter under skin. "Check the security footage. Missing 8:17 p.m. No name. No explanation. Just 6 words and a time." She looked up instinctively, scanning the crowded deck. Crystal chandeliers reflected across the river. Laughter drifted through the room again, thinner now, forced back into existence after being interrupted. Somewhere a jazz trio resumed playing. Nobody appeared to be watching her. Yet the feeling remained. Someone knew exactly what she had seen. Someone else knew more. Abigail slipped the phone back into her apron pocket and headed toward the service corridor. She moved carefully, not wanting attention, but attention found her anyway. "Abigail." Victoria's voice floated across the room. Soft, elegant, dangerous. Abigail stopped. Victoria approached with the effortless grace of someone accustomed to being admired. Up close, her smile never reached her eyes. "I wanted to apologize if I sounded dismissive earlier." The words were polite. The pressure underneath them was not. "You've had a difficult evening." Abigail said nothing. "Trauma changes people," Victoria continued gently. "Losing family the way you did, I can only imagine." The mention of her brother landed like a thumb, pressed into a bruise. Information Victoria should not have known, or cared enough to remember. Infine, Abigail replied. Good. Victoria's smile widened slightly. Then perhaps you'll stop creating problems where none exist. She touched Abigail's arm for barely a second before walking away. It looked affectionate from a distance. Felt like a warning. 10 minutes later, Abigail was in the lower service level near the security office. The sounds of the gala became muffled here. Stainless steel counters, industrial sinks, the steady hum of refrigeration units. A dishwasher rattled somewhere behind swinging doors. For a moment, the normality almost calmed her. Then she remembered the text. Missing 8:17 p.m. The security monitor room sat partially open. Empty. A guard had apparently been called upstairs. Abigail knew she should leave. Instead, she stepped inside. The footage archive remained open on one monitor. Rows of timestamps. Camera angles. Loading bars. Her pulse quickened. She found the wine room feed. 8:12 p.m. Victoria entering. 8:14 p.m. Victoria exiting. Exactly as Abigail remembered. Then she scrolled forward. 8:16 p.m. normal footage. 8:18 p.m. normal footage. She froze. There was no 8:17. Not corrupted. Not damaged. Gone. 1 full minute removed cleanly from the timeline. Someone had cut it out. Interesting. The voice came from behind her. Abigail nearly dropped the mouse. Alessandro Moretti stood in the doorway. Alone. His expression revealed nothing. She stepped back immediately. I wasn't snooping. You were. His gaze shifted to the monitor. The question is why? Abigail swallowed. Because someone sent me this. She handed him her phone. Alessandro read the message once. Then again. Most men would have reacted. Asked questions. Demanded names. He simply became still. More still than before. The kind of stillness that made people nervous. Who sent it? I don't know. He handed the phone back. Neither do I. Silence settled between them. Then his eyes moved to the corner of the screen. Not the missing minute. Something smaller. Something Abigail had overlooked. A log entry. One line of text. One access record. At 8:19 p.m., exactly 2 minutes after the footage vanished, someone had used a second administrative keycard to enter the security system. And the name attached to it belonged to a woman who was supposed to be giving a speech on the upper deck at that exact time. The name on the access log seemed to absorb all the oxygen in the room. Cassandra Bell, director of the Moretti Foundation, Victoria Sinclair's closest friend. The woman who had been standing on the upper deck introducing scholarship recipients to reporters at 8:19 p.m., Alessandro stared at the screen for several seconds. Not shocked, not angry, just watching. Abigail had the uneasy feeling he was rearranging pieces inside his head. That's impossible, she said quietly. That's what concerns me. His voice remained calm. He clicked once and closed the access record. Come with me. 5 minutes later, they stepped into a private dining room near the center of the yacht. Dark wood walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking black water. A 12-foot table polished so perfectly it reflected the chandelier above it. The kind of room where decisions worth millions were made between bites of expensive food. Abigail immediately felt out of place. Her apron suddenly seemed louder than everyone else's tailored suits. Waiting inside were Victoria, Cassandra, the foundation's attorney, and 2 board members. Every face turned toward her. Victoria smiled first. There she is. The attorney adjusted his glasses. Mr. Moretti informed us there was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. Such a clean word. Such a useful one. Alessandro took a seat at the head of the table. He did not invite Abigail to sit. He did not invite anyone else either. The silence stretched. Cassandra folded her hands neatly. I understand my name appeared on a security log. It did, Alessandro said. Then there's an error. Her answer came instantly. Too instantly. The system occasionally duplicates credentials. The attorney nodded. That happens more often than people realize. Victoria looked toward Abigail with sympathetic concern. This is why assumptions can be dangerous. Abigail felt the room narrowing around her. Every person at that table had power, education, status, connections. They spoke the same language. She was the waitress who had interrupted a celebration, the easiest person to dismiss. Cassandra slid a document across the table. To avoid unnecessary confusion, security prepared a statement. Abigail looked down. One paragraph. Simple. It claimed she had acted emotionally after misinterpreting a service towel stain and agreed there was no evidence of misconduct. Just sign it, Cassandra said gently. Nobody wants this to become embarrassing. Abigail stared at the paper. Embarrassing. Not dangerous. Not suspicious. Embarrassing. The distinction mattered. She could feel eyes waiting, expecting. The easy path sat directly in front of her. Sign the statement. Keep her job. Disappear again. Instead, she reached into her apron pocket and placed her phone beside the paper. Then she smoothed her crooked name tag with one hand. Tiny movement. Ridiculously small. But it steadied her. I won't sign something I know isn't true. Nobody raised their voice. Somehow that made the moment heavier. Victoria exhaled softly. Abigail, sweetheart. Nobody is accusing you of lying. The sweetness cut deeper than anger. We're simply trying to protect you from a mistake. Then why delete a minute of footage? The room went still. Not dramatically. Not visibly. Just enough. Cassandra's smile faltered for half a second. The attorney glanced toward her. Victoria looked away first. Alessandro noticed all three reactions. Abigail saw him notice. The attorney recovered quickly. You have no proof footage was deleted. Actually, Alessandro said quietly. We do. Every head turned toward him. He rested one hand on the table. The missing minute exists. Nobody spoke. And someone attempted to access the security system 2 minutes later. Victoria's expression remained flawless. Almost. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her water glass. Just once. Then relaxed. Cassandra stood. This has gone far enough. She gathered her things with practiced composure. I'll have IT review the logs in the morning. It sounded reasonable, responsible, completely innocent.
Alessandro merely nodded.
Please do. Cassandra smiled.
Victoria smiled.
The meeting appeared over. Controlled. Managed. Buried. Then Abigail looked down at the ensign statement still sitting in front of her and noticed something strange. The timestamp printed in the footer showed the document had been created at 7:54 p.m., 23 minutes before the security footage disappeared. The timestamp seemed to glow on the page long after everyone stopped speaking. 7:54 p.m., 23 minutes before the missing footage. 23 minutes before anyone supposedly knew there was a problem. Cassandra saw it first. Her eyes dropped to the footer, then immediately lifted away. Too quickly. The attorney reached for the document. Administrative templates are often prepared in advance. His voice was smooth, professional, the kind of explanation designed to sound reasonable before anyone had time to question it. Of course, Alessandro said. Nothing in his tone revealed what he thought. He folded the statement once and slid it into his jacket pocket. The room remained suspended in that strange silence where nobody wanted to be the first person to move. Then Victoria smiled. I think we're all exhausted. The tension eased by degrees. Chairs shifted. Water glasses were lifted. The meeting dissolved without resolving anything. That bothered Abigail more than if people had shouted. Powerful people rarely needed to raise their voices. They simply decided reality and expected everyone else to follow. An hour later, the gala was winding toward its final speeches. Abigail found herself back below deck in the service corridors. Steam drifted from the industrial kitchen. The smell of coffee and roasted garlic hung in the air. Someone laughed near the dish station. For a few moments the yacht felt normal again. Then a voice called her name. Abigail. She turned. An older man stood near the rear loading entrance. Thin, gray beard, maintenance uniform, She recognized him immediately. Harold Jensen, the former wine cellar attendant. He had worked Moretti events for years before suddenly disappearing 3 months earlier. You remember me? Of course. Harold glanced over his shoulder. You shouldn't be asking questions tonight. Then why are you here? His expression tightened. Because I made the mistake of staying quiet. He reached into a worn lunchbox and pulled out an old flip phone. The plastic casing was scratched. One corner had been repaired with black tape. It looked ancient compared to modern smartphones. I was going to throw this away. He handed it to her. Then I saw what happened upstairs. Abigail stared at the device. What is it? Evidence. Maybe. Harold looked suddenly tired. Maybe nothing. Before she could ask another question, he walked away through the service exit and disappeared into the night. 10 minutes later, Abigail stood inside a small security office with Alessandro. The old phone sat on the desk between them. His battery still held a charge. Barely. When it powered on, the contact list contained exactly one saved number. No name. Just a phone number repeated dozens of times through old messages. Alessandro watched quietly while Abigail opened the image folder. Hundreds of photos appeared. Wine inventory. Shipment labels. Storage shelves. Nothing dramatic. Nothing criminal. Then she stopped scrolling. One photograph filled the screen. A timestamp from 6 weeks earlier. Victoria Sinclair standing inside the private wine cellar after midnight. Alone. The image itself was not the problem. The problem was what she was holding. Not a wine bottle. A small silver case. The same size and shape as the perfume atomizer Abigail remembered seeing before the gala. Alessandro became very still. There are more. Abigail opened another image. Then another. Different dates. Different nights. Victoria entering the cellar repeatedly after business hours. Always carrying the same silver case. Silence stretched across the office. Long enough for Abigail to hear the hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Long enough to feel her pulse in her fingertips. Finally, Alessandro reached for the phone himself. His thumb paused over one photograph. Not because of Victoria. Because of the timestamp. That date. Abigail looked closer. 6 weeks earlier. The exact week Alessandro had collapsed during a board meeting and blamed it on exhaustion. For the first time that night, something changed behind his eyes. Not certainty. Not belief. Something colder. Something far more dangerous. Then he zoomed in on the corner of the image and found a second figure reflected faintly in the cellar mirror. Someone standing beside Victoria. Someone he recognized immediately. The reflection was distorted by the cellar mirror, stretched by angle and distance. But Alessandro recognized the man immediately. Anthony Russo. His personal financial advisor for 11 years. The man who handled foundation audits. The man who had attended family holidays. The man he trusted enough to leave alone with confidential records. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The old phone rested on the desk between them like something alive. Alessandro zoomed in again. The image became grainy. Useless in a courtroom. Dangerous everywhere else. Can you prove it's him? Abigail asked quietly. No, his answer came immediately. But I know his posture. The silence that followed felt heavier than anger. Abigail had expected outrage. Demands. Orders. Instead, Alessandro placed the phone down carefully and stood. That frightened her more. Men who exploded could be predicted. Men who became quiet could not. Rain tapped softly against the office window overlooking the river. Somewhere below deck, dishes rattled through an industrial washer. The ordinary sounds made everything feel stranger. Like the world had decided to continue spinning while something rotten was being uncovered underneath it. Alessandro pulled out his phone and made one call. Marco. A pause. I need copies of every foundation audit from the last 18 months. Another pause. No. Don't request them through the office. His eyes never left the photograph. Get them yourself. He ended the call. Then another. Dr. Heller. His voice remained calm. I want independent testing done on a substance. He glanced toward the folded linen cloth still sitting beside the old phone. Tonight, when he finally looked at Abigail again, she noticed something had changed. Not trust, not yet, but he was no longer looking at her as the waitress who interrupted his engagement party. He was looking at her the way he looked at evidence. "Why? Didn't you walk away?" he asked. The question caught her off guard. What? Most people would have. Abigail stared at the rain sliding down the glass. Because somebody should have listened the first time. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the desk. When my brother died, everyone kept saying nobody could have known. But people knew pieces. They just ignored them because it was easier. Alessandro said nothing. "I don't want money." Her voice remained steady. "I don't want favors. I don't need a reward." She swallowed once. "I just want the truth to stop losing to people with nicer clothes." The room became very still. Alessandro looked away first. Not because he disagreed. Because he seemed to remember something. An old memory passing briefly behind his eyes. Then his phone vibrated. One message. "Marco." He opened it. His expression didn't change. That was how Abigail knew it was bad. He handed her the screen. A spreadsheet filled the display. Foundation expenditures. Grant distributions. Audit approvals. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Then she noticed the repeated signatures. Anthony Russo had approved dozens of transactions. So had Cassandra Bell. The same names appeared together over and over again. "That's not unusual," Abigail said. "No," Alessandro's voice dropped lower. "Until you compare them against attendance records." He opened another file. Gala schedules. Foundation meetings. Travel itineraries. The dates did not match. Multiple approvals had supposedly been signed while Anthony was overseas and Cassandra was speaking at public events hundreds of miles away. Somebody had been fabricating records. Somebody with access to everything. The rain continued tapping against the window. Alessandro stared at the names for a long time. Then another message arrived. This one from Dr. Heller. Independent analysis completed. Trace neurotoxic compounds detected on the linen cloth. Not enough to kill. Enough to weaken. Enough to accumulate. Enough to make a healthy man look sick. Alessandro read the report twice. Then a third time. Finally he sat down and looked toward the dark river outside. 3 months ago, he said quietly, almost to himself. Victoria insisted I cancel my second medical opinion. Abigail didn't answer. 2 months ago she told me Anthony was the only advisor I could trust. Another pause. Longer this time. And 6 weeks ago when I collapsed during that board meeting. His jaw tightened. Not much. Just enough. He looked down at the photograph again. At Victoria. At the man standing beside her. Then he closed his eyes for one brief second and realized he had spent years doubting the wrong woman while trusting the wrong people. Alessandro did not cancel the rest of the gala. That was the first thing that frightened Abigail. Most people would have shut everything down. Security, lawyers, questions, chaos. Instead, the party continued. Champagne flowed, cameras flashed. A string quartet played near the river-facing windows. And somewhere inside all that elegance, a trap was being built. The foundation board gathered in a private lounge shortly before midnight. Floor-to-ceiling glass overlooked the black water below. A single bottle of unopened wine sat in the center of the table. Nobody touched it. Victoria arrived 10 minutes late. Perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect composure. "I hope we're not still discussing service towels," she said lightly as she entered. A few people chuckled. Alessandro did not. He sat at the far end of the room, one hand resting on a closed folder. "Sit." Just one word. Victoria Obad. Abigail stood near the wall beside a coffee station. Invisible again. Or at least everyone thought she was. Alessandro opened the folder. Not dramatically. Not like a prosecutor revealing evidence. More like a businessman reviewing numbers. "There's a discrepancy in the security system." Victoria tilted her head. "How unfortunate. Cassandra already explained it." Did she? Alessandro asked. Silence followed. Not long. Just enough. The system duplicated credentials, Victoria said. That's what happens with old software. Alessandro nodded once. Interesting. He slid a sheet of paper across the table. Then explain this. Victoria glanced down. A routine access report. Nothing alarming. At least at first glance. I'm not sure what you mean.
Alessandro Lind.
Back. Neither am I. Again that silence. Abigail had begun noticing how he used it. Most people filled silence. They rushed to explain, to defend, to talk themselves into mistakes. Victoria smiled and reached for her water glass. Perhaps your IT department can clarify. Perhaps. Alessandro's voice remained calm. Too calm. Abigail watched Victoria's hand. Watched the tiny pause before she lifted the glass. The hesitation lasted less than a second. Most people would have missed it. Abigail remembered it instantly because she had seen the exact same pause earlier in the wine room. The same moment of calculation. The same glance toward the left side of the table. Her eyes shifted there now. Toward Cassandra. Cassandra avoided looking back. A phone vibrated on the conference table. Nobody touched it. The screen lit briefly, then went dark again. Alessandro's gaze lingered on it. Before we continue, he said, I have a question.
Victoria smiled.
Of course. Where were you at 8:17 p.m.? Nothing moved. Not the board members. Not Cassandra. Not even the waiter refilling coffee. Victoria answered immediately. Giving interviews on the upper deck. For the entire hour? Yes. Too fast. Too clean.
Alessandro nodded slowly.
And you never entered the wine cellar? No. Abigail felt her pulse jump. Not because of the answer. Because of the wording. Victoria had just denied something nobody had asked. Alessandro noticed too. The corner of his mouth almost moved. Almost. Interesting, he repeated. Then he closed the folder and stood. Meeting over.
No acquiesctions. No confrontation.
No victory. The board members relaxed visibly. Victoria seemed to relax too. For the first time all night she looked confident again. She rose from her chair and headed toward the door. Her hand touched the brass handle. Then she stopped. Across the room, Abigail was still standing beside the coffee station. Their eyes met, and for the first time since the night began, Victoria no longer looked at her like a waitress. She looked at her like a threat. Victoria's hand remained on the brass door handle for 1 second longer than necessary. Then she smiled again and left the room. The door closed softly behind her. Nobody spoke. Alessandro stood motionless beside the conference table, staring at the place where she had been. Abigail could feel something shifting beneath the surface now. Not victory, something heavier. The moment a person stops protecting an illusion and starts testing it instead. 24 hours later, the annual Moretti Foundation Gala filled the grand ballroom of the Sinclair Arts Center. Crystal chandeliers glowed above 600 guests. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters waited near the stage. Politicians, donors, judges, celebrities. This was Victoria's kingdom. Every scholarship, every hospital wing, every smiling photograph attached to the foundation carried her signature. Abigail almost hadn't been allowed inside. A board member had mistaken her for catering and pointed toward the service entrance. She said nothing, just adjusted her name tag and kept walking. Alessandro had asked her to be there. That was enough. The ballroom lights dimmed. Victoria stepped onto the stage to applause. Elegant black gown. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. Tonight, she began, we celebrate trust. The irony landed like a knife. Near the back of the room, Alessandro sat beside his attorney. His expression revealed nothing. On the table in front of him rested a thin black folder. Closed. Untouched. Victoria continued speaking. About charity. About service. About responsibility. The audience loved her. Abigail watched from the side aisle. Then she noticed something. Cassandra was checking her phone repeatedly. Not messages. An email inbox. Waiting for something. The same anxious motion every 30 seconds. The same glance toward the ballroom doors. Abigail leaned toward Marco, Alessandro's head of security. She's waiting for someone. Marco followed her gaze. Who? I don't know. How do you know she's waiting? Abigail remembered years of restaurant shifts. People waiting for dates. Deliveries. Bad news. Good news. Because she keeps checking before the message arrives. 5 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. An older man entered carrying a hard case. Harold Jensen, the former wine cellar attendant. Cassandra went pale. Not dramatically, just enough. Alessandro saw it immediately. The speech ended. Applause filled the room. Victoria smiled as she stepped away from the podium. Alessandro rose. One moment. His voice wasn't loud. Yet the room fell silent. Every conversation stopped. Every camera turned. Victoria froze halfway back to her seat. Alessandro walked onto the stage carrying the black folder. Before tonight concludes, he said calmly, there are several foundation records that require clarification. Confusion rippled through the audience.
Victoria laughed lightly.
Alessandro, this isn't the time. It is. He opened the folder. One document at a time appeared on the projection screen behind him. Audit reports, security logs, foundation transfers, access records, the missing minute of footage, the altered timestamps. Murmurs spread through the ballroom. Victoria's smile finally began to crack. This proves nothing, she said. You're right. Alessandro looked toward Abigail. The entire room followed his gaze. Hundreds of eyes. The same kind of room that would have ignored her 24 hours earlier. Abigail stepped forward carrying the old flip phone. She had kept it with her the entire night, never letting it leave her sight. Her hands trembled slightly. Her voice did not. There's more. Harold opened the hard case. Inside sat an external backup drive recovered from the wine cellar security archive. The original files. Untouched. Unedited. A technician connected it to the ballroom system. The screen flickered. Then the missing minute appeared. The room stopped breathing. Victoria entering the cellar. Anthony Russo beside her. The silver case opening. Liquid transferred into a wine bottle. Clear. Undeniable. No explanation survived it. No excuse fit around it. Alessandro stared at the screen. For a moment he looked older. Not because of betrayal. Because of recognition. He saw every warning sign he had dismissed. Every question he had never asked. Every time power had spoken louder than truth under his own name. Victoria's voice broke for the first time. Alessandro. He didn't answer. On the screen, another file loaded automatically. An audio recording. Anthony's voice. Victoria's voice. Discussions about weakened medical reports. Controlled audits. Foundation money. Long-term succession plans after Alessandro became too sick to lead. The ballroom remained completely silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. Alessandro lowered his eyes. Then he looked at Abigail. The waitress he had almost dismissed. The woman everyone else had already dismissed. The woman who refused to let the truth disappear. He closed the folder slowly, turned toward his attorney, and spoke in a voice so calm it chilled the entire room. Call my attorney. The ballroom remained silent long after the attorney left to make the calls. No one rushed toward Victoria. No one defended Anthony Russo. The power that had protected them for years seemed to evaporate in real time, leaving only two frightened people standing beneath lights that suddenly felt too bright. Victoria tried to speak once, then stopped. There are moments when a lie collapses so completely that language cannot save it. This was one of them. By sunrise, the board of the Moretti Foundation had voted unanimously to suspend Victoria Sinclair and Cassandra Bell from all leadership roles pending a full forensic investigation. Federal auditors were brought in. Foundation accounts were frozen. Anthony Russo resigned before noon and was served with legal notices before sunset. The engagement was over before the newspapers even reached front porches. Yet none of that was the moment Abigail remembered most. 3 weeks later, she stood in a quiet office overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Rain tapped softly against the windows. A framed foundation charter hung on one wall. Alessandro sat across from her with several folders spread across his desk. "These are yours," he said. Abigail frowned. The first folder contained copies of her employment records. Every performance review, every shift report, every complaint. Someone had marked her as emotionally unstable after the gala. Another file showed multiple requests she had submitted for schedule accommodations while caring for her mother. Most had been denied without review. Alessandro slid another document forward. "Read the last page." Abigail did. Her throat tightened. The false notes had been removed. The disciplinary record erased. A formal correction had been entered into the system. Her file now reflected exactly what happened. Nothing more. Nothing less. The truth. "You fixed it," she whispered. No, Alessandro shook his head. It should have been correct the first time. That answer meant more than money ever could. Outside the office, lawyers continued untangling the foundation scandal. Investigators traced years of manipulated reports and concealed transfers. But inside that room, something smaller and more important was being repaired. Abigail's name. Her reputation. The story people told about her when she wasn't present. 2 months later, Iris Carter's medical bills were no longer arriving in threatening envelopes. A legal trust funded by recovered foundation assets now covered her treatment. Not as charity. Not as a favor. Because those funds had originally been stolen from programs designed to help families exactly like theirs. Abigail insisted on that distinction. Alessandro respected it. By winter, new policies had been implemented across every Moretti property. Service staff could report concerns directly through independent channels. Security footage could no longer be altered without multiple authorizations. Anonymous complaints were reviewed by outside auditors. The system that had nearly buried the truth now had safeguards designed by people who once would have been ignored. One evening, several months later, Abigail found herself back aboard the same yacht. The same river. The same city lights reflecting across dark water. The difference was in the room. Nobody asked her to carry a tray. Nobody handed her a service apron. She was there because she had been invited. A guest. A respected one. On a small display table near the entrance sat a shadow box. Inside was a neatly folded white linen cloth. The faint blue-green ring remained visible beneath the glass. The stain that once represented danger now represented proof. The moment someone finally refused to stay silent. Abigail stood looking at it when Alessandro approached holding 2 glasses. "Why?" For a second she laughed softly. "Funny choice. I thought so too." He handed 1 glass to her. Neither drank immediately. The river moved quietly beyond the windows. Somewhere below deck, dishes clinked faintly in a kitchen preparing for another event. Life continuing. Healing rarely arrived with trumpets. More often it sounded like ordinary things finally becoming safe again. Abigail lifted her glass. "You know," she said, looking at the framed linen cloth, "my brother used to say the truth was annoying because it never stayed buried." Alessandro stared at her for a moment. Then he smiled. A real one this time. Small. Rare. He was right. They touched glasses gently. No speeches. No applause. No cameras. Just 2 people standing in a room where power had once ignored the truth. And because one waitress refused to look away from a stain everyone else dismissed, the truth had finally been heard.